Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental in information security. How do you actually know if all your security measures are, well, working?
Exactly. We're looking at information security management systems, ISMS for short, and specifically how you monitor and measure them.
And our main guide for this is ISO IEC 2704, right?
That's the one. Think of it as the playbook, really. It tells you how to put those measurement ideas into practice, the monitoring, the analysis, the evaluation. And today we're zeroing in on a really practical bit, Annex B.
Annex B. So this is less theory and more
Yeah.
hands-on examples.
Totally. Annex B in the 2016 version, it's like opening a toolkit. It's packed with these blueprints, or as the standard calls them, measurement construct examples.
Blueprints, okay.
Yeah, and they're not just fixed rules, they're templates you can actually adapt, mold to fit your organization's specific security setup. So our plan today is to walk through some key examples, see how you can use them to gauge both how well your security activities are running and if your controls are actually effective in the real world.
Okay, cool. So templates to help ask the right questions, track the right things. Sounds useful. Let's jump into one of these blueprints. Where do we start in Annex B?
Let's kick things off with B2. This one's about resource allocation. The basic question it asks is, are we actually putting the resources we planned, the money, the people, into information security like we said we would in the budget?
That feels pretty foundational. I mean, you can have great plans, but without the resources.
Yeah, just sit on the shelf, right.
Yeah.
So Annex B suggests measuring this by breaking down the resources you've allocated in your annual budget. You look at categories like personnel, internal staff, external contractors, hardware, software, any security services you outsource. Get a clear picture of where the money is supposed to be going.
And how do we make that something you can actually measure? Like, what's the formula?
The formula itself is pretty simple. You just take the total resources allocated in the budget
Okay.
and divide that by the total resources you actually used during that same period.
So you get a ratio, allocated versus used.
Exactly. It shows how closely your spending lines up with what you planned.
And what's the goal here?
Yep.
What counts as good for this measurement?
Well, the standard lists the target as implementation evidence. So the main thing is having clear proof documentation that you did allocate the resources and you are tracking the usage.
So just demonstrating you're doing the process?
Pretty much. But what's interesting is the suggested reporting format, a radar diagram.
A radar diagram. How does that work here?
Imagine spokes coming out from a center point, each one representing a resource category, personnel, hardware, software, etc. On each spoke, you plot 2 points, the allocated amount and the used amount. Connecting the points creates 2 shapes.
I see. So you can visually compare the planned shape versus the actual shape.
Right. And it immediately highlights where things are out of whack. Maybe you allocated a ton for new software, but barely used it because, I don't know, training lagged behind. It jumps right out at you.
That makes a lot of sense. A visual check. How often should you be doing this check?
The standard recommends yearly, which, usually lines up nicely with annual budget cycles.
Okay, yearly. And who's typically responsible for this? Who needs to own this, collect it, and use it?
Annex B lays it out. The information owner responsible for the data's meaning is often the information security manager. The information collector, gathering the budget and spending figures, is usually also the security manager.
Makes sense.
And the information customer, the person or group who needs this info for bigger decisions, that's typically the board of directors.
So the board gets visibility into whether security is actually being funded as planned. Where's the raw data pulled from?
You'd be looking at the approved security budget itself, obviously. Then, detailed expenditure reports showing the actual spend, and also reports on how resources are being used, like which projects or security activities are consuming those resources.
Got it. And this whole process, how does it tie back into the main ISO 27001 standard?
It directly supports a couple of key clauses in the 2013 version. First, 5.1, which is all about leadership and commitment. I mean, properly allocating and tracking resources is management demonstrating commitment, right?
Absolutely.
And it also directly relates to 7.1, which specifically says the organization needs to determine and provide the resources needed for the ISMS. This measurement shows you're doing that.
Okay, resource allocation, definitely a solid starting point. What's the next template example Annex B gives us?
Next up is B.3, focusing on policy review. Here, the information need is, are your security policies actually being reviewed when they're supposed to be? Like at planned intervals, or maybe after a big change happens?
Crucial. Policies aren't set it and forget it. They need to stay current.
Exactly. Outdated policies can be worse than useless sometimes. So Annex B suggests measuring the percentage of policies that have been reviewed.
A percentage. Okay, how's that calculated?
Simple again. Number of policies reviewed in the last year, divide that by the total number of policies you have, then times 100.
Straightforward. Does it give any guidance on what a good percentage looks like a target?
It does. It suggests a kind of traffic light system. Green if over 80% are reviewed, orange for 40% to 80%, and red if it's less than 40%.
Gives you a quick visual status check?
Yeah, but, and this is important, it's just about the act of reviewing. A high percentage doesn't automatically mean the quality of the review is good. You could review 100%, but if the reviews are superficial...
Right. Checking the box isn't enough. The review needs to be meaningful. Good point. How often should this percentage be tracked?
You'd collect the data after your plan review cycle, maybe annually or whenever those significant changes trigger reviews.
Yeah.
And then you'd report on it each time you collect.
And who are the key players for policy review tracking?
The information owner would be the specific policy owner, the person responsible for that document. The information collector might be someone like an internal auditor verifying the review actually happened. And the measurement client, who uses this metric to see if policies are up to date, that's likely the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer.
And the proof. Where do you find evidence a review took place?
Data sources would be your policy review plan itself, the document history section within each policy that should log review dates and outcomes,
Right.
and maybe a central master list of all your security documents showing the last review date for each.
And for reporting this, how best to show it?
Annex B suggests maybe a pie chart for the current status review versus not reviewed. Or, to see how you're doing over time, a line chart tracking that percentage period over period could be really useful.
Makes sense. And connecting this back to ISO 2701.
This ties directly to Control A.5.1.2 in the 2013 Annex A, which explicitly requires policy reviews at planned intervals or after changes.
Yeah.
It also supports Clause 7.5.2 on creating and updating documented information, ensuring those documents stay accurate and relevant.
Okay, so resource allocation and policy review, two really solid practical examples. What other ground does Annex B cover? It seems quite comprehensive.
Oh yeah, it covers a lot. For instance, B.4 looks at management commitment. It suggests measures like tracking how many scheduled management review meetings actually happened and what the participation rate was like.
Ah, so holding leadership accountable for showing up.
Exactly. It links back to Clause 9.3 on management review and reinforces that leadership aspect from 5.1 again. Shows security needs top-level engagement.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
What else? Training, maybe.
Yep. B11 tackles ISMS training or awareness. It proposes measuring the percentage of employees who have completed the required awareness training. That lines up with Annex A Control 8.7.2 on competence, making sure people know their security roles. And B12 expands on that, looking at broader information security training, measuring the percentage who got role-specific training annually, also under 8.7.2.
Building that security culture, does it get down to specific technical controls too, like passwords?
It sure does. B16 is about password quality, specifically for manually created ones. It suggests measuring the ratio of passwords that actually meet your organization's complexity rules. That connects directly to 8.9.3.1 on using secret authentication info. And it's not just logical stuff. B20 looks at physical entry controls effectiveness.
Oh, interesting. How?
By tracking the number of unauthorized physical entries into secure areas, linking to A.11.1.2. And what's really interesting about B20 is that it explicitly includes an action descriptor.
An action descriptor, what's that?
It specifies what steps should be taken if the number of unauthorized entries goes above a certain threshold. It shows that measurement isn't passive.
Right. It's meant to trigger a response and improvement. That's a key point.
Exactly. Measurement for the sake of measurement is pointless. It needs to drive action. Annex B highlights this by including that action piece in examples like B.20 and also B.28, which is about backup testing effectiveness.
Good. So measurement leading to action. What about, say, malware protection? Any examples there?
Definitely. B.23 deals with protection against malicious code. It suggests tracking the trend of attacks that weren't detected by your preventative tech. Links to A.12.2.1. But crucially, it adds a warning note. Yeah, it warns you how to interpret it. Like, a high number of blocked attacks sounds good, but it might just mean you're being targeted more heavily or by more sophisticated stuff. Context matters.
That's a really important nuance. Don't just look at the number in isolation.
Precisely. Then there's B.27 on log files review, measuring the percentage of critical logs that get reviewed on schedule, tying into A.12.4.1. And B.31 looks at security in third-party agreements.
Ah, supply chain risk. How does it measure that?
It suggests looking at the average percentage of your required security controls that are actually addressed in your agreements with third parties. Relates to A.15.1.2. But again, there's a note of caution about using averages. A high average could hide one really risky vendor relationship.
It's good the standard includes those warnings and interpretation tips. Encourages thinking beyond just the raw metric.
Yeah, it adds depth.
Give us maybe one more example just to show the range here.
Okay, how about B.33? Information security incident management effectiveness. This one measures the number of security incidents that weren't resolved within your target timeframe. Directly links to Annex A clause A.16 on incident management. Helps you see if your response process is actually efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking across all these resources, policies, training, technical controls, physical security, incidents, Annex B, really does provide a structured way to think about measuring pretty much every key aspect of an ISMS.
It absolutely does. Each example gives you that template. The information need, the measure itself, the formula, maybe a target, frequency, who's responsible, data sources, reporting ideas. It takes away a lot of the initial where do I even start feeling when setting up ISMS measurement. And having that cross-reference back to the specific ISO 27001 clauses is super helpful for context.
You mentioned briefly there's another annex, Annex C, a different approach.
Yeah, just quickly, Annex C offers a more flexible alternative. It's not the structured table format like Annex B. It shows a free-form, text-based way to build a measurement construct. It uses training effectiveness as an example, defining different variables like number of employees, number who took training, number who passed the test.
Okay.
And then shows how to calculate various effectiveness ratios from those variables, like what percentage passed the assessment after training.
So Annex C is maybe for situations where the Annex B template feels a bit too rigid, more adaptable.
Exactly. It shows there isn't just one way to do it. It encourages you to think creatively about measuring what matters most for your specific situation and goals.
This has been really insightful. It feels like Annex B especially gives organizations a really practical toolkit to get started with meaningful ISMS measurement.
Absolutely. That's the core message. These are starting points, blueprints. The real power comes when you take these ideas and adapt them thoughtfully to your own organization's needs and risks.
So for listeners wanting to take the next step, digging into the full ISO IEC 27004 standard and really exploring Annex B seems like the way to go.
Definitely. That's where you'll find the whole range of examples. And actually implementing these kinds of measures, well, it leads to real benefits. Things like better accountability, real proof of security improvements, evidence for compliance, and ultimately just smarter decisions about where you put your security efforts and budget.
Loads of value there. Okay, so maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about which of these measurement areas we discussed. Maybe is resource allocation or policy reviews or perhaps training effectiveness or incident response times. Which one really hits home for the challenges you're facing right now? And how could you adapt that Annex B thinking to get a clearer, data-driven picture of your own security posture? Something to mull over. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.